We're coming down to it. Halloween is almost upon us, and as we creep closer to that all-important All-Hallowed Day, let's look back on some cashmere Halloween from our past. Today on Cozy Horror, with me, Dr. Plague. Today we'll get some spooky tales from cashmere Halloweens in our past. So, settle in with something warm and prepare to immerse yourself in the spooky ambience of this charming yet strangely mysterious town.
Bill, the sign says take 2. Bill rolled his eyes at Clyde before pouring half the bowl into his bag and holding out the bowl for him to take the rest. Well, I don't see anyone here to stop me. Come on, Clyde, live a little. Clyde looked around guiltily and finally took 2 pieces out of the bowl and tossed them into his bag. Bill sighed. Such a goody two-shoes, he said, dumping the rest into his bag. Clyde looked around, trying to see who was watching. But what if someone else comes by and wants candy? Then I guess, Bill said, as he hefted the sack onto his shoulder, they should have come earlier. Come on, it's almost 9. I want to fit in a few more houses. The 2 boys tromped down the sidewalk, Bill's eyes roving as he looked for another house with a bowl on the porch. The houses with people handing out candy were nice and all, but the ones with unattended candy bowls, guarded only by signs and good manners, were the best. The kids were thinning out now, the unagreed upon hour that Halloween ended approaching, and that would make it more likely that no one would tattle to their mommy if they saw him scooping up a bowl. His sack was getting heavy, but he knew there was room for a little more. Bingo, Bill said, seeing a house with a bowl on the porch. Bill, don't, Clyde started to say, but Bill was up the stairs and on the porch before he could get it all out. The sign said take 2, but Bill scoffed as he pushed it over and picked up the bowl. He dumped it into his sack, hefting it back on his shoulder without even asking Clyde if he wanted any. He would probably be a little baby about it anyway. Can we go home now? Asked Clyde, looking around nervously. We're gonna get in trouble. You worry too much, Bill said, grunting a little as he came down the stairs. If they leave the bowl on the porch, he explained, tightening his grip on the mouth of the full sack, then they aren't coming out to supervise when you take it. They get an empty bowl, you get the candy, and everyone wins. Clyde seemed unsure, but Bill put it out of his mind as they started home. It was 5 blocks home, and it was gonna be a hike with all these sweet treats bouncing around on his back. They parted so a group of kids could make their way up the porch steps, and as they made their way up to the sidewalk, Bill could hear the disappointed noises from the kids behind him. He shook his head, first come, first served, and kept right on walking. Clyde was quiet, twitching nervously as they headed home. Bill hated it when he did that. His little brother was such a goody-goody that he sometimes worried too much. Clyde always gave you away if he saw you doing bad stuff, shaking and stammering and letting Mom know that Bill had been up to his old tricks again. Bill stopped suddenly and opened his sack, reaching in for a piece of candy before finding exactly what he was looking for. One of the last couple of houses had those peanut butter pumpkins that Bill really liked, and he wanted one badly. There was one peeking just below the surface of the candy mountain that was pressing at the side of his bag. Bill had just started unwrapping it when Clyde spoke up. Bill, Mom hasn't even checked it yet. What if it's poison or something? Bill rolled his eyes as he bit into the chocolate pumpkin and chewed, relishing the taste. Don't be such a baby, Clyde. It's in a wrapper. No one's gonna poison candy if it's in a wrapper. I don't need Mom to check my candy. I can do it myself. He hefted the sack again, walking a little faster so Clyde would have to keep up, and thinking about maybe digging out another one of those pumpkins. They had moved into a less full part of the sidewalk, the kids mostly gone home by now, and that was probably the only reason that he heard it. It was a weird sound, like footsteps right behind him, and Bill turned his head suddenly, but found nothing behind them. What? Clyde asked, but Bill shook his head. Nothing. Let's go. Bill started walking faster, but no matter how fast he walked, the sound still followed. It actually quickened as he sped up again, keeping pace with him easily, and a glance behind him showed no one following him. What was this, Bill wondered? Was someone playing a joke on him, or maybe... He shook his head. It was just the idea of Halloween, filling his head with nonsense. There were no ghosts after him, no spirits hounding his tracks. Maybe he needed a little more candy. Maybe if he had just another piece of candy, he'd feel better. He slipped the sack off his shoulder and reached in, but something seemed off. Was the sack emptier than it had been? No, it couldn't be. He had only taken a single piece out. It just looked that way. There was still so much candy here. It was just his nerves. He took a Kit Kat out and ate it before pulling the sack back onto his shoulder again. As he started walking, he heard the sound again. Something was following behind him. The plop, 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 like worn down shoes as it tailed Bill and Clyde. It was past dark, the lights from the street lamps providing islands on the sidewalk, with widening gulfs of darkness between. Bill felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. There was no way this could be. "Did you hear that?" Clyde asked, his voice low and scared. Suddenly, Bill realized this wasn't just in his head. If Clyde could hear it too, then it had to be real. "Go away!" Bill shouted, suddenly turning around and confronting whatever it was that was following him. He got some strange looks from a couple of kids further up the block, but there was nothing on the sidewalk behind him but a single brightly wrapped piece of candy. Candy, Bill thought. That would help settle his nerves. He'd have a Snickers or a Reese's and be better in his mind for sure. He put the bag on the sidewalk, opened the neck, and reached in to get some. The missing candy was obvious this time. Bill had lost about a quarter of his sack somehow, and had never even noticed the loss. Was that what the thing was doing? Stealing his candy? But how? How could it take candy from his closed bag? It didn't make any sense. He pulled the bag shut and threw it over his shoulder without taking anything out of it. It was noticeably lighter now. The weight of it was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. "Bill, is something wrong? You look scared." "Let's go," Bill almost gasped out, his teeth chattering as he started walking again. Right away came the steps. Plop, 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 plop. They were following him, hounding him, making him crazy. Why was this happening? He wondered. At the sound chased him. He had just taken some candy. Surely this, whatever it was, wasn't haunting him just for treats. That was stupid. It didn't make any sense. Plop, 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 plop. He wanted to run, but what would it do then? His grandpa had told him on a hunting trip that when you were confronted by a predator, you weren't supposed to run. If you ran, you might think you wanted to be chased, and might get excited. Bill didn't want to be chased. Just then, Bill wanted to be inside his house with the door locked and his blanket over the top of him, so whatever monster this was couldn't get him. You were safe under the covers. Everyone knew that. And Bill desperately wanted to be safe. "Bill, what?" "Cross the road," Bill growled at Clyde, and the two of them crossed in the middle of the road, Clyde looking around fitfully as they did. Jaywalking, Bill thought. However would Clyde recover from this one? Still, the pop, pop, pop sound followed them across the road. They were about a block from home now, and Bill was starting to feel a little silly about all this. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he just thought he'd seen all that candy gone. There was no way it could actually be gone. He was holding the opening to the bag. He'd put it down and check, and then he'd find his bag full. That would put his mind at ease. "Bill, why are we stopping?" Clyde asked, sounding as scared as Bill felt. I think we should..." "Shut up," Bill snapped, opening the bag and looking inside. His stomach fell. It was worse than he thought. He'd been wrong. It wasn't a quarter of the candy. Now, as he looked at the pile of treats inside, it was half the bag that was missing. It couldn't be real. There was just no way, but sure enough, the bag was only half full. "No," he moaned. "No, no, 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 no!" Bill hefted the bag and began to run, Clyde crying for him to wait as he chased after him. He could hear the pap, 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 pap sound behind him and feel the bag getting lighter and lighter as they flew along. Clyde was calling his name, trying to get Bill to stop, but Bill was lost to reason. It was taking his candy. It was taking his candy. He had to get home. He had to make it to the house before it could get it all. The footsteps were coming faster and faster, chasing him as he rounded the corner. He saw the inflatable yard ornaments of his home. He knew he was close to the safety of a closed door and the warm lights of the house. The footsteps were still chasing him, and now he couldn't get the words out of his head as he ran. The sound of the footsteps seemed to whisper at him, and he wondered if the ghost that was chasing him was his own greed. "Take two," it seemed to say, repeating again and again, "Take two." When he finally collapsed on the front porch of his house, panting and shaking, "Take two." His sack was as slack and as empty as it had been when he left. With a shaking hand, he opened it, and there, he found the proof of what he had been looking for all along. At the bottom of the sack sat 2 full-size chocolate bars, their prize from Mrs. Nesbrook, who had lived just across the street. When Clyde came puffing up a few minutes later, Bill was crying on the porch, his sack in his lap and his face in his hands. Bill, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Oh, it's all gone. It took my candy. It's my own fault. You were right, Clyde. I got greedy. I shouldn't have messed with the rules. Now, it's all gone, and But when Clyde started to laugh, it shut him up in a hurry. Clyde opened his bag, and to Bill's surprise, it was much fuller than it had been. "There's no ghost eating your candy, silly. There's a hole in the bottom of your bag." Bill looked at him in disbelief. But I heard it, the footsteps. It was the sound of the candy falling out, Clyde said, flipping over Bill's bag and showing him the hole in the bottom of the sack. The sack had been at critical mass, Bill supposed, and the candy had made the hole bigger as it bumped around in there as he ran. Bill looked at the hole, dumbfounded for a minute, and then he started to laugh. He took the candy bars out of the sack and threw the bag away, putting an arm around his brother as the two went inside. "I suppose it serves me right for just taking what I wanted, huh?" Bill asked, feeling the fear dissipate inside him as he began to feel silly instead. "Yeah, but it's okay," Clyde said. "We can share my bag." They spent the rest of the evening eating candy and telling spooky stories. Bill decided that from now on, he would listen when someone told him not to take too much.
It's always fun to see the growth of Cashmere, to see how the characters develop and how we warp them into what they may be now. Well, we'll get right back to our Cashmere Halloween.
Sheriff Amos Guthrie sat down at his desk, hard at work on some last-minute paperwork, before knocking off. It was about 9:30, and the last two deputies had left not long ago. Guthrie had been happy to finish their paperwork for them, not minding staying late. This was one day he didn't mind staying a little later. Let the kids get off the road. Let the minivans and the station wagons get home. Guthrie would return to his trailer at the Happy Wheels Motor Lodge, polish off a six-pack, and go to sleep till it was time to do it again. He hated Halloween, hated everything about it, and it was probably because of what had happened last year. Guthrie. He looked up, hearing the haggard whispers and shuddering. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He had seen the man die. He had been there, and he had seen him die. This wasn't a Dickens play. He wasn't Scrooge. This was just his nerves riding high off the season, and he wasn't going to... Guthrie. Amos looked up from his paperwork, glancing around as he was certain that one of his co-workers would be hiding around the corner and playing a little prank. When no one popped out to laugh at him, he went back to his paperwork. He had the usual Halloween nonsense to write up. Petty vandalism, theft, some minor assault, that murderer they had caught after that nonsense. Guthrie! He jumped, banging his knees on the desk as he looked up to see a momentary flash of a familiar figure. He was still in his uniform, his hat cocked to cover the dent in his skull that Guthrie knew was there. The brim of his wide trooper hat did nothing to hide the burning eyes that were glowering at him. He was bent over the desk that had once been his, the two of them inches apart, and Guthrie was reaching for his gun when the specter was suddenly gone. Amos was left breathing heavily, his eyes roving like a wounded deer. Before he grabbed his keys and headed home, the paperwork would still be there tomorrow. Clearly he was working too hard. He needed to relax some. He killed the lights, feeling like a little kid who was trying to make it up the stairs before the monster got him, and as he locked the door, he didn't dare look up at the dark office behind the glass. If Amos Guthrie was looking up, he would probably see a rotted, grinning face looking back at him. There were just too many damn kids on the sidewalk for him to shout and fall over the rail behind him. He was back in his cruiser before he dared to look up, and there was no grinning specter waiting for him. But it did seem like he could see something lingering in the typing pool. Guthrie put the cruiser in reverse and carefully pulled out onto the road, wanting to escape this place as quickly as possible. As he waited for a pack of kids to walk by, he remembered what had happened last year about this time, maybe even while he'd been sitting at this exact light and watching a different group wander past. "What's the matter, Guth? Not a fan of Halloween?" That's what Sheriff Masterson had said to him as he waited for the kids to go past. Amos Guthrie, Deputy Guthrie then, had been on call that night with the big man himself, and the two had been having a pretty easy night till then. A couple of nuisance calls, some kids out helling, but mostly what they had been doing was a lot of sitting. Masterson had just been about to suggest that maybe they could head to the park and listen to Charlie Guthrie. Someone he kept joking had to be some kin to the deputy, when a call came in about a strange happening by the East Woods. "We heard screaming coming from the tree line. I can't imagine what anybody would be doing around that creepy old place, especially on Halloween." What the caller had been doing out there, the Girl sounded like she couldn't be out of high school. They hadn't asked. Probably out there with her boyfriend, where no one was likely to find them, Masterson hadn't said before they set out. He bemoaned that they were going to miss the show, but if there were folks in the woods in trouble, then they needed to go have a look. Masterson got on the horn to Parks and Services as he rode out, but he'd been having trouble raising anything but static. "We'll drive by the ranger station and see if we can't see what all the fuss is about," Masterson had said. Personally, Guthrie believed they were probably all drunk. Most of the rangers lived on site, and they were known to get a little stupid on the holidays. A couple of 4th of Julys ago, one of them had nearly set the Southwoods on fire, claiming that something had been coming up to get them. He was doing time at Stragview now, and would probably have to answer to the federal boys after that. Guthrie didn't know, and he didn't much care. He had been in Kashmir for 5 years, half a decade, and he knew what he wanted. Masterson was an old man, still in decent shape, but not getting any younger. He reminded him of the sheriff from that show that his grandpa used to watch, The Rifleman, and he ran Kashmir like it was some mining town in dirt spit nowhere. Guthrie was not impatient. He could wait his turn to be sheriff, and among the deputies, he had the best claim. His range scores were impeccable, he had the best credentials, and he was well liked amongst the community. Despite this, he knew he was not held in the good regard of Sheriff Masterson. The old lawman was nice enough, and he hadn't refused a talented deputy when one came and put in an application. But Guthrie sensed that Masterson didn't trust him. He was right not to. Guthrie was gunning for his job, but Guthrie could afford to be patient, and he wasn't going to put a bullet in the old man's back just to have something that he could campaign for next year when Masterson had his second heart attack or finally got tired of chasing kids with spray cans. Guthrie was a fan of the long game, and he would be here long after Masterson was in his grave. They left town and drove to the station, a large row house on the edge of the woods. They had set up in a place where the east woods and the west woods joined, and the lights were bright enough to see before they came in. Yep, Guthrie thought the lot of them were probably drunk as lords and stumbling around like fools. They would walk in, find out that the screaming had been one of them that had gotten lost in the woods, and they would have to go find him, because the people who were supposed to do that were too tipsy. What they found instead was an empty station, the lights on, the party spread about, but no one was home. "Strange," Masterson had said, and then he suggested they go out to the spot the caller had talked about. "Perhaps our dutiful rangers are in a bit of trouble." Guthrie had just shrugged and followed him back to the cruiser. Guthrie stopped his car again as a group of kids ran screaming across the road. He made eye contact with a harried-looking woman dressed as a cowgirl, but she only shrugged. She was wrangling more than cows, it seems, and the look seemed to ask him what he expected of her. It was Halloween, and the goblins and ghosts were wild. Guthrie grumbled as he drove on, the road clearing quickly. He hated Halloween. The two had driven to the edge of the east woods. Masterson rolled the windows down, the better to hear the dulcet tones of whoever was in distress, but Guthrie heard little besides the wind playing through the pines and the faraway sound of night birds. It was nearly 9, the time when porch lights would be going off and the kids would be scampering home, but he had been in the woods long enough to know that something was amiss. "Do you hear it?" Masterson asked, cocking his head as he put a theatrical hand to it. "I don't hear anything," Guthrie said, not sure what he was supposed to be hearing. "Well, maybe if you'd grown up around here, you'd know what you were listening for." Guthrie bit his tongue, trying not to yell at the old man as he sat listening in the driver's seat. Little comments like that were the reason that Guthrie knew the old man didn't like him. It was always some snark about how he hadn't grown up here or how he wasn't from here. Guthrie could no more control where he had or hadn't been born than he could control when he emptied his bowels. The old man seemed to hold it against him for some unknown reason. That was how he knew that Masterson would never back him for sheriff. If he was going to win, he would have to do it on his own. Guthrie was about to say that the sheriff might need to elaborate when a scream pealed out through the woods. Masterson stiffened, listening to the scream as it wafted back towards town. "Come on," he said softly, all the good humor gone from his voice. The two were out of the car in seconds, Guthrie with his service-issue Glock in his hand, and Masterson with his bulky-looking Smith & Wesson revolver. The revolver was far from department issue, but when you were sheriff, you carried whatever you damn well pleased. Guthrie preferred the magazine capacity on the Glock, something he had carried when he was a beat cop in Clayton County, but Masterson always liked to talk a big game about the stopping power of the .45 slug. "I don't need 15 shots if I can put him down in one," he would always say, a phrase that seemed to end the conversation whenever Guthrie brought it up. The East Woods were a place they had all been warned to steer clear of. They were the tract of woods that surrounded Stragview, and they were supposed to be dangerous. Marshes and strange topography seemed to run rampant in the East Woods, and people who went into them often did not come out. Masterson was, of course, not afraid of the East Woods. He claimed that he had something that would keep him safe, but even he didn't usually go running into the night. He was very brave, but headstrong, and it was something that would get him into trouble one of these days. Perhaps even tonight. "Guthrie!" Amos Guthrie jumped as he heard the voice crawl over his shoulder. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw the rotting corpse sitting in the back seat. It pressed its fingers through the holes in the back seat grating that separated the cab from the back seat, leaning in close so he could glower at him. "You like taking my spot, Guthrie? You like sitting at my desk, answering my correspondence, driving my cruiser? Did you tell him how you got it, Amos? Did you tell him what you did to—" A horn blared and Guthrie jumped as he slammed on the brakes. He had rolled right through a stop sign and was now nose to nose with a minivan and a very angry mama behind the glass. She was probably yelling something at him that the kids in the back seat wouldn't have heard on the Disney Channel, and Guthrie checked the rear view as he backed up and let her head on. There was nothing there, but there had been, and he knew it. He turned on the radio as he drove, trying to settle his nerves before he ended up in the town paper for running someone over. "Happy Halloween, everyone. This is Jonathan Marvolo, your eternal host on Mountain Radio 109.7. Static cut across the melodious voice of John Marvolo, and when Guthrie smacked the radio, he heard it come clear again. "Damn Fritzy thing. Tonight, we want to caution all of you to be extra careful as those little ghosts and goblins wander the street. Temporary Sheriff Guthrie has issued a statement to the public to report any crime straight to the station, and that he will personally answer any emergencies tonight." Guthrie gritted his teeth. They just loved to throw that at him, didn't they? Temporary Sheriff Guthrie. They could have just said Sheriff Guthrie. Sometimes it seemed like the whole town liked to remind him that he wasn't of the town. Well, he'd show them. Next election cycle, he'd make it official. Then he'd be sheriff in title, not just in name. The radio crackled again, and Guthrie slapped it with his palm savagely. The voice that came oozing out, however, was not John Marvolo. "This dedication goes out to Temporary Sheriff Guthrie. Don't get comfortable in my spot, you son of a bitch. I'll be back, and hell's coming—" Guthrie snapped it off and turned into the driveway of the trailer park he lived in. "Damn it. He really hated Halloween.
Oof, tea's almost ready. I hope you'll have a cup with me while we enjoy more tales from Kashmir. I do hope you're enjoying this Halloween programming, and I hope you'll be back tonight as we rejoin our Kashmir players for more Halloween adventures.
Amos Guthrie stepped into his dark single-wide, feeling apprehensive as all hell. Was that something sitting in his lazy boy? Was there a shadow lurking in the corner? He hung his duty belt on the hook, hung up his coat, and was preparing to head to the kitchen when the TV suddenly buzzed to life. There was a cop procedural on, and the two officers had their guns drawn on each other. They were glowering knowingly at the other, but the younger of the two almost appeared to be smiling. "I knew you was a rat, Dexter." "Yeah? Then you should have put me down when you had the chance," he said, pulling the trigger and shooting the older cop. "Look familiar?" said a raspy voice from the armchair. Guthrie turned and found the moldering old corpse sitting in his chair. The uniform was even worse now, blood showing through the fabric as Masterson's normally well-kept form bloated and pressed against it. His face was a ruin, ichor and congealed blood sticking to it like makeup, and he grinned crookedly at him as he watched him from the lazy boy. He was pointing a bony finger at the TV set, the whiteness beneath the mottled flesh, making Amos think his predecessor had been doing more than collecting bugs in his grave. Guthrie shook as he took a step back, the wood paneling bumping against him. No, to hell with this. This couldn't be real. Guthrie was suddenly about 4 years old again, wearing one of his dad's undershirts as a nightshirt and shaking like a leaf as he watched the closet. He had gotten up to go to the bathroom, the water he'd drunk before bed, trying to make an escape. But when the closet door had begun to rattle, Amos had hit the wall and stood like a deer in headlights. Whatever was in there was giving the slatted door a good shaking, and little Amos was shivering like a leaf as he watched it in the semi-darkness of his room. As he had shaken, his bladder had let go, and the front of his nightshirt and the thick carpet of his room had soaked in his fear. When the door had rattled again, threatening to open, Guthrie had screamed like a dying thing, and his parents had come on the run. It had turned out to be Lucy, his mom's pet cat, but he remembered the look of shame on his father's face as his mother cleaned him up in the bathroom. Even at 4, Amos knew he never wanted to see that look again on his father's face, and he had strove to make him proud from that day on. What would he make of his only son now, as he cowered in his living room, menaced by something that was probably nothing more than a manifestation of his stress? It was like Scrooge had said, this was nothing more than skipping his break today, that extra cup of coffee at 3, or the ribs he'd eaten for dinner. There was more of gravy than of grave about. Masterson got up and walked towards him then, and all that good sense slipped out like the pea when he had been nothing but a tyke. He reached to his side, but he had already hung up his gun. It didn't stop him from grasping, and as Masterson loomed over him, he watched a fat, black cockroach scamper from the corner of his mouth and disappear into his hairline. "What's the matter, Amos? Cat got your tongue?" The TV went off then, leaving him in a soupy darkness, and when it crackled back to life, Masterson was gone. Guthrie stood, panting for a few minutes, his hands creeping up to his neckline to touch what was there. He fumbled for the lights, flipping them on and basking in the sudden explosion of harsh illumination. The single wide was empty, except for him, and Guthrie breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know how much of this he could stand. It was nerves. It had to be nerves. Guthrie hadn't believed in ghosts since he was a child, and he wasn't about to start now. The crack and hiss of the first can sounded like heaven to the rattled deputy, and he sat at the Formica table and drank thoughtfully. He shouldn't be drinking, he was technically on call, but he didn't care. The ghost of his old boss was haunting him, and Guthrie thought he knew why. He pulled the rawhide length out from beneath his uniform shirt and looked at the necklace, just as he had 100 times before in the past year. He could hear Masterson explaining it to him as he took a slow and deliberate sip from the cheap beer. "It's a totem, something they gave me when I became sheriff. It lets the bad shit out there know that I've got authority. So stick close to me so they don't gobble you up on general principle." Guthrie had always thought it looked like a dream catcher, the strands woven into something like an eye. The iris was blood red, the eye itself a deep blue that was nearly black, and the whole thing was set into a diamond of thickly woven strings of black and red and brown and green. Masterson hadn't known what it was called. He'd just called it a totem, but Guthrie thought it might have some deeper meaning. The cheap linoleum floor creaked near the entrance to the kitchen, and Guthrie didn't bother to look. "Come have a drink, I suppose. Seems the least I can do." To his surprise, he heard something drop into the chair to his left, the sound decidedly mushy. It reached out a moldy hand and grabbed a beer, popped the top after struggling with it for a little, and took a sip. Guthrie tried to ignore the hand, or the sound of liquid sliding to the floor as the whatever it was drank, and when it smacked its lips appreciatively, he shuddered. "What do you want, Masterson? I'm sure this little visit has more to it than just scaring the bejesus out of me." The old ghoul cackled. "Yeah, you got a lot more sand than I remember, kid. Yeah, there's a reason behind this little visit. I just wanted to let you know that I don't intend to stay dead. You have a lot to answer for, Amos Guthrie, and I mean to see that you do." Guthrie took another long pull from his can, thinking. He supposed he did have some things to answer for. Guthrie had done a lot more than claw his way up the ladder to get where he was, but this old ghoul wasn't going to take it from him, that was for sure. When they had entered the woods, he had seen Masterson pull the thing out and lay it on his chest. He asked him what it was, and the old man had chuckled as he held it out so that Guthrie could have a look at it. It was the first time he had seen it, and he had known it was important even then. "It's a totem, something they gave me when I became sheriff. It lets the bad shit know that I have authority, so stick close to me so they don't gobble you up on general principle." Guthrie had clutched his weapon, not liking the sound of that in the least. They had proceeded into the woods, guns at the ready, and Guthrie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Neither of them were making a lot of effort to be quiet, but Guthrie thought that he could hear something else beneath it. It sounded like something large crashing deeper into the woods, following the two as they ran towards the screaming. Guthrie didn't know what it was, but he hoped it was running away from the screaming, and that it didn't decide to take an interest in them. They moved deeper into the trees, discovering the source of the screaming, and something a little more than they expected. They came out of the woods suddenly, neither really seeming to expect it, and Guthrie saw a scar in the forest that seemed to be mostly missing its trees. In the center was a copse of pines, and what he saw stopped him in his tracks. The ground beneath the sparse trees was glowing, showing him a deep gorge in the ground that was surrounded by dark forms. Some of them wore robes, some of them wore normal clothes, but others were dark, hunched things that capered about on all fours. The screamers were bringing their hands up to the sky before dropping them, screaming in a feral chorus. There were about 10 of them. It was hard to tell from here, but as Guthrie watched, One of them suddenly dropped into the glowing pit and was consumed by the harsh glow that followed. That glow looked kind of nice the longer he saw it pulsing there. Guthrie wondered what it might be like to fall into that pit. He wondered what it might be like to be devoured by it. His feet had taken him 3 or 4 steps towards the Pine Barrens when he shook himself and turned back to Masterson. Masterson hadn't moved. He just stuck his hands in his belt and watched Guthrie from the edge of the woods. "Aren't you coming?" Guthrie asked, his mind still at war with itself. No need," Masterson said, looking a little sad. "There's nothing we can do." "Nothing we can... What the hell are you talking about? We need to save them before..." But Guthrie didn't know what would happen to them, what was happening to them, and he shook his head as he tried to find the words. Masterson only shrugged. "There are things in this town that you don't understand, kid, and this is one of them. The Pine Barren is special, though not in a good way. When I heard the screaming, I was hoping it was just the beasties out here messing with some hikers. The totem would have scared them away, made them leave, but this is different. These guys have been drawn here, and there isn't anything we can do." Guthrie was shaking, his legs wanting to turn him back towards the pit, but he made them step away as he turned to face Masterson. He was about to ask Masterson how he could just stand there and watch this, when something screamed a little louder than the people around the pit. Guthrie turned just in time to see something come flapping out of the cut in the earth, a huge, dark something that cast its shadow against the moon. He looked back at Masterson, but all the bravado had disappeared from the man. "Oh, shit," he said, backing away as the thing dove down onto the people who were left around the pit. "We gotta go, now," he said, and as he ran, Guthrie realized this wasn't something he usually dealt with. He was running too, adrenaline taking over as the creature screamed and dove at the assembled people again. They'd run into the woods, hoping the canopy would offer some protection, but the flap of wings and the cry of the thing proved that its appetite was far greater than they thought. It stalked them through the woods, a run that seemed far longer than it had earlier, and when Masterson went down, Guthrie thought the creature had gotten him. Turned out it was a root, and Masterson had definitely broken his ankle. He was yelling and twisting, the root having a hold on him that he couldn't seem to break. Guthrie, help! I need help, kid! It's my ankle, it's stuck, please, help!" But the leaves that pattered down on him told him everything he needed to know. They both looked up to find the creature sitting on a limb and observing them. Masterson reached for his chest, searching for the totem, but his hands shook when he realized it wasn't there. Amos, I lost the totem. If we find it, we can drive it off. Do you..." But when he looked, Guthrie was clutching it to his chest and backing away slowly. He had seen the leather cord break when the sheriff had fallen, seen it hit the ground, and grabbed it up, hoping that it would help him make it out of all this. In that moment, Guthrie hadn't been thinking about taking the sheriff's position, hadn't wanted his job or his life, and had no thoughts of malice or leverage. At that moment, all Guthrie wanted was not to be eaten by that thing. "Guthrie," Masterson whispered. Guthrie kept backing away. "Guthrie!" Guthrie kept backing away. "God damn you!" he yelled, but it was muffled as the thing fell on him. Guthrie ran as the creature fed, Masterson's screams following him as he fled from the woods and finally stumbled across the cruiser. They would never find Masterson's body, not a trace of it, or the thing that had devoured him. The Rangers, as it happened, had been investigating the screams as well. They had gotten lost in the woods, never making it to the Pine Barrens, and had returned in the wee hours of the morning. They, too, had joined the search for Sheriff Masterson, Guthrie being busy, repeating his story again and again to the various people in power. A memorial plot had been set up in Whispering Pines for him, and Guthrie had been made temporary sheriff a month later. The mayor and the council had told him it was because he was the most qualified. But he knew why. They had seen the totem he wore religiously. They knew he had done a little more than flee from the creature that had gotten Masterson. They knew, and they wanted to see what else he could do. "You'll pay," the voice said. "You better believe you'll pay. I'll see to it personally. See you soon, kid." Guthrie jerked awake as the phone rang. It was morning, and he had a red mark on his face from sleeping against the kitchen table. Had it all been a dream, he wondered? No, it couldn't be. The empty beer cans to the left of him, the ones with the discarded fingernail on the rim, were enough evidence of that. His phone started to ring again, and Guthrie picked it up as he remembered that he was still on call. "Sheriff Guthrie," he breathed out, getting up to get the coffee pot going. "Sheriff!" Earl Parker cried happily. "Thank God! You got to get to the cemetery." "What's the trouble?" "It's Sheriff Masterson's grave. Something's happened to it." The coffee pot shattered as it slipped from Guthrie's hand. No, what was this? "What's happened?" Guthrie asked, breathlessly. "Well, it's empty."
The spooky tales just wouldn't be as good without good friends and good ambience to enjoy everything coming our way from Kashmir.
When I moved in with my grandma about 5 years ago, I didn't know what to expect. Grandma had been living alone since Grandpa died earlier that year, and when they diagnosed her with dementia when I was a senior in high school, it seemed like a bad omen. Though they had caught it early, the doctor had suggested that living alone would probably only help her condition deteriorate faster. Dementia patients often see their condition slow when they have company. Your mother has lived alone since your father died, and if someone were able to live with her, I think the ability to have someone to talk to would help her immensely. Mom and Dad had looked at each other, not sure what to do about the situation, but seemed to come to a decision pretty quickly. With me looking at college and them unable to afford housing in the dorm, they offered me a compromise. Live with my grandmother, attend college nearby, or spend some time trying to get a scholarship and a grant to pay for my own housing. Grandma and I had always been close, and she was delighted to let me stay with her a while. There was no worry that I would sneak boys in or throw parties. It wasn't really something that I was into, and they knew that I'd be home most every evening studying or resting for the coming day. I moved in at the beginning of the academic year, and that meant I was there for Halloween. Grandma and I had been living pretty harmoniously, only butting heads a few times when I came home late from class. Grandma liked to be in bed by 9, and she didn't like to be woken up when I came in late. Grandma liked to spend her time in bed, knitting or watching TV, but I still came in and had a chance to talk and visit a little. Some days she knew who I was, some days she thought I was my mom, but she was never hostile or confused with me. If she called me by my mom's name, I was Claire. If she called me by my name, then I was Julia. Either way, we talked about our day and about life in general. I learned a lot of family secrets that way, things that she was surprised I didn't remember, and I was glad for this time with her while she was still lucid. So, when I came in to find her putting candy in a bowl, I was shocked that she was out of bed. She was huffing and puffing, clearly exhausted, and I wondered when she'd had time to buy candy. She didn't drive, didn't even have a car, and I didn't remember buying it. She looked up happily, holding the bowl out to me in greeting. "Claire, there you are! I wanted to hand candy out to the kids, but I feel so weak. I must be coming down with something, but I can't disappoint the kiddos. Grandma seemed to forget that she was pushing 65 and not in what anyone would call the best of shape. When she did too much and ran out of energy, she always said that she must be coming down with something and took herself off to bed to rest. It seemed to be her mind's way of explaining it. Somehow it seemed I had forgotten it was Halloween, but Grandma hadn't. It wasn't that surprising. If there was one thing you could count on Grandma to remember, it was Halloween. Grandma had always been in love with Halloween, at least according to Mom. She'd insisted that I decorate earlier in the month, had made us go get pumpkins from the store, which I then carved and set on the stoop, and if she had been in better health, she would have likely been in a costume handing out candy. As it stood, she was lucky to have made it from her room to the table, and I knew it. I took the bowl and told her not to worry, and that I would make sure the kids got their candy. She thanked me and went to lie down, her energy spent. I went to the porch and put out the bowl of candy. I put a note on the stool so the kids knew it was a 2-piece limit, and came back in to study. Tonight might be sugar palooza for the little goblins out in the street, but for me, tomorrow was Chem midterm, and I needed to study. I was doing well, but this was only freshman year. I had big dreams, and they would be harder to fulfill with poor marks in chemistry. I heard the kids shrieking and giggling as they came up the road, heard their footsteps on the porch, heard the steps pause in speculation as they read the sign, and then heard them retreat after they took their candy. Grandma lived in a fairly nice area, and the kiddos seemed to be used to the 2-piece rule. I'm sure some of them took a handful and ran, but they seemed to be in the minority, if they did. It was dark out, probably pushing 9, when I heard a knock on the door. I looked up from my book, peering at the door as I saw the outline of a little kid in a ghost costume. He was standing there patiently, bag in hand, and I wondered how he had missed the bowl and the sign. Maybe he was looking for an authentic experience, or maybe he was special needs. Either way, I got up and walked to the door to see what he wanted. I opened the door to find the kid in an honest-to-God bedsheet ghost costume. He looked right out of a Charlie Brown special, and the shoes poking out from the bottom looked like loafers. He held a grubby pillowcase in one hand and a candy apple in the other, and when he looked up at me through the holes in the sheet, I almost laughed. He looked like a caricature, like a memory of a Halloween long ago, and I wasn't sure he could speak for a moment. When he did, I wished he hadn't. His voice was raspy, unused, and it sucked all the joy out of me. "Is Maddie here?" he asked, and I shook my head as I tried to get my own voice to work. "Nah, sorry, kiddo, there's no Maddie here." He nodded and then turned and left with slow, somber steps. I thought it was odd. He hadn't even taken any candy, and when I closed the door and went back to my work, I was filled with a strange and unexplainable sense of dread. I had forgotten about it by the time Halloween rolled around again, but the little ghost hadn't forgotten about us. October 31st found me once again sitting at the table and studying for a midterm. I was still working on my prerequisites for biochem, and if everything went as planned, I'd be starting the course next year. Grandma was much the same, maybe a little more tired and a little more forgetful, but we still spent a lot of our evenings chatting and watching TV. Sometimes she braided my hair, sometimes she showed me how to knit, but we always spent at least an hour together every evening. Tonight, she had turned in early, saying she was really tired and wanted to get some rest before this cold caught up to her. I'd set the candy bowl on the front porch, careful to add the usual note, and when someone knocked on the door at about 8:30, I looked up to see the same little silhouette I had seen the year before. I got up, telling myself it couldn't be the same kid, but when I opened the door, there he was. Same bedsheet ghost costume, same faux leather loafers, same bulge around the eyes to indicate glasses, same slightly dirty pillowcase. It was him, just as he had been the year before, and I almost prayed that he would remember before speaking. "Is Maddie here?" he said, in the same croaking voice, and I tried not to shudder as I smiled down at him. "Sorry, kiddo, wrong house." He nodded solemnly, turning around and slowly walking back up the front walk as he made his way back to the street. I watched him go, not quite sure what to make of this strange little ghost boy, or his apparent lack of growth. The kid looked like he might be 5 or 6, though his voice sounded like he might be 5 or 6 years in his grave. I briefly considered that he might be a real ghost, but I put that out of my mind. It was the time of year, nothing more. I went back to studying, finishing out the evening by visiting with Grandma when she got up from her nap. We drank cocoa and watched a scary movie, and I fell asleep beside her in the bed that she had once shared with Grandpa. The next year saw the return of the little ghost boy, and he was unchanged. I tried to ask him why he kept coming back after being told that she wasn't here for 2 years running. I wanted to ask him why he thought she was here, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him anything. There was a barrier between us that went deeper than a misunderstanding, and it was like we were standing on opposite sides of a gulf and shouting at each other over the tide. He left when I didn't say anything, nodding and turning like he always did, before disappearing into the crowd. I didn't see him the year after that, but to be fair, I was a little preoccupied. That was my 4th year in college, and I was only a year from graduating and moving on to work in the field of biochemistry. I'd been heading home when a colleague of mine invited me to a little department party. I was helping my teacher as a TA, and the other TAs were having a little get-together in honor of the season. I started to decline, but I thought it might be fun. I'd never really allowed myself to get into the college scene, never really partied or hung out with friends, and all that focus takes a toll sometimes. I hadn't really been to a social gathering since high school, and I was curious to see what it was like. I'll admit I indulged a little more than I should have, but when I came home and found my grandmother lying by the front door, it sobered me up pretty quickly. Her doctor said that she had fallen when she tried to get to the door, and I couldn't help but wonder if she had been going to answer the knock of a certain little ghost boy. They kept her in the hospital for nearly 3 months, monitoring her and making sure that she hadn't given herself brain damage or something. Her condition progressed while she was in the hospital, and after a time, she either only recognized me as my mother or didn't recognize me at all. She began asking for Albie, always looking for Albie, but I didn't know who that was. Mom was puzzled too, wondering if she were talking about her dad, whose name was Albert. I've never heard her call him Albie, but I suppose it could be a nickname. They knew each other as kids, so it's entirely possible. After a while, they sent her home, but the prognosis was not good. They gave her less than a year to live, saying she would probably need round-the-clock care from now on. I didn't need to be asked this time. I felt guilty for not being there, and I knew that I had to be there for her now. I took a leave of absence from school, putting my plans on hold so I could take care of my grandma. I continued to take some courses online, hoping not to get too far behind, but I devoted most of my time to her. She was mostly unresponsive, whispering sometimes as she called out for Albie or her mother and father, great-grandparents I'd never met. She talked to Albie about secret places and hidden treasures, and her voice was that of a little girl now. She had regressed even more, and every day that I woke up to find her breathing was a blessing. Grandma proved them wrong, and when Halloween came around again, I was in for a surprise. I had taken to sleeping on a cot at the foot of her bed, keeping an ear out for the sound of trouble, but a loud clatter from the kitchen had me rolling to my feet and looking around in confusion. I looked at the bed and saw that she was still in it, so the sound couldn't have been her. As another loud bang sounded in that direction, I was off and moving before I could think better of it. I was afraid that an animal had gotten in the house. Not a burglar. No burglar would have made so much noise. And when I came into the kitchen, I saw, just for a second, a furry black backside of some cat or dog, or maybe a small bear. As it climbed out of the cabinet that it had been rooting through, I saw it was a person, though it was certainly a grubby one. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7. She looked filthy. She was wearing a threadbare black dress and curly-toed shoes and a pointed hat that she scooped off the floor. The longer I looked at her, the more I came to understand that she wasn't really dirty. She was just covered in what had to be stove ash. She didn't seem to notice me. She was digging through cupboards and drawers as she searched for whatever it was that she was after, leaving destruction in her wake. "Hey," I called out after some of my surprise had faded. "What are you doing?" The girl turned and looked confused at me. "What are you doing here? This is my house. You better leave before my mama sees you and gets mad." She continued to look through things, working her way into the living room, and I followed behind her, not sure what to say. Was this a dream? If it was a pretty weird one. I could feel the carpet beneath my feet, hear the leaky faucet in the kitchen, smell the lunch I had cooked a few hours ago. The little girl had wrecked half the living room before I shook off my discomfort and asked her what she was looking for. If this was a dream, then I suppose I had to play along. "I need my pillowcase, the one with the pumpkin on it. It's my special Halloween bag, and I can't go trick-or-treating without it." I opened my mouth to ask where she'd left it, but I stopped suddenly as something occurred to me. I had seen that pillowcase before. It had been in Grandma's closet for ages, and when I'd offered to wash it for her, she had shaken her head and said it had too many memories. There was a pumpkin drawn on it, in charcoal, a black cat on the other side, and a witch hat between them. Someone had sewn things around the top so that it could be pulled shut, and it looked like a grubby peddler's sack. Surely, if this was a dream, then Grandma wouldn't mind if I gave this child the bag. Maybe that's why she'd been keeping it, just in case this kid came looking for it. I told the girl to wait a minute and that I'd get it for her. "Okay, but hurry. Halloween won't last all night." Took me a little looking, but I finally found it under some old quilts at the top of the closet. At some point, Grandma had recolored the cat in the hat, and I wondered when she'd had the time or the energy. She hadn't even been out of bed without me by her side for over a year, so this must have been before her fall. I took the bag out to the living room and held it out to the little girl, her eyes lit up, and she snatched it happily as she danced around and thanked me. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she trumpeted. "Now I can go trick-or-treating." As soon as if on cue, a knock came from the door. The little witch ran to answer it, and I was unsurprised to see the little ghost boy waiting for her. "Mabby," he said happily, and she wrapped him in a hug like she hadn't seen him in years. "Albie, are you ready to go?" she trumpeted in return. "For ages, slowpoke," he said, the smile beneath the sheet coming out in his words. The two left the porch hand in hand, disappearing into the crowd as they went to go trick-or-treating. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of warmth and completion, and that was when I remembered my grandma. I'd left her alone for a long while, and when I went to check on her, I found her too still in her bed. I started to begin CPR, but after putting a couple of fingers on her throat, I knew it was too late. She was cold. She'd likely been dead before I was awoken by the clatter in the kitchen, and I held back tears as I called the ambulance and let my parents know that she had passed. The funeral was quick. Grandma was laid to rest next to Grandpa, and a week later, I was helping Mom clean out Grandma's house. It was my house now. Grandma had left it to me in her will, and Mom was packing up some mementos and deciding what to donate. We were going through her closet when I found a box with keepsakes in it. There was a picture of Mom when she was little, wedding photos of Grandma and Grandpa, and some letters that Grandpa had written her during Vietnam. Mom came over as I was going through them, smiling at the pictures and crying a little over the letters, but I felt my breath stick in my throat as I came to a very old photo at the bottom of the box. It was a small photo of 2 kids in costumes on the front porch of a much different house. One was a ghost, his eye holes bulging with glasses. The other was a witch who had clearly rubbed wood ash on her face. "Julia?" Mom asked, the picture shaking in my hand. "Honey, are you okay?" The picture fell back into the box, and there on the back was the last piece of the puzzle. Madeline and Albert. Halloween, 1960. That was the last I saw of the little witch or the ghost. But when Halloween comes to call, the two are never far from my mind. I always hand out candy and decorate the house, just as Grandma would have wanted. You never quite know what sort of ghosts and goblins might come to visit.
Looks like we're at the finale now. I do hope you've enjoyed our tales, and I hope you'll come back tomorrow for more Halloween cozy horror. Till then, let's see how it all wraps up.
Sheriff Guthrie wasn't the only one who was a little hungover that morning. Earl Parker yawned as he opened the gate of the Whispering Pines Cemetery, chaining the lock as he drove in. He had been up drinking till about 2 a.m., and he wished he had stopped before midnight. He was no spring chicken, and every year it became harder and harder to function the next day. He was driving past the neat rows of gravestones, his old pickup puttering along amicably, when he saw something that made him slam on the brakes. He goggled at it for a moment, unsure of what he was seeing. This was unthinkable. Who would have done this? I mean, who in town would have desecrated a grave in this fashion? Unbelievable or not, the fact was inarguable. Someone had dug up the grave of Sheriff Masterson. The stone, an ornament piece of granite bearing the name and birth of the beloved sheriff, had been shoved over. The police badge on top of the headstone had been broken off and lay jaggedly beside it. The grave site was dug up, the dirt thrown across the graves on either side of it. They had dug down about 12 feet, lower than a casket would normally be, and the roots and clay had been torn up and scattered about the bottom of the hole. There hadn't been a casket in the grave. It was more of a place to gather and mourn their loss than anything. But amongst the roots and the clay, Earl could see something that sent him running back to the truck for his phone. It was a department-issue uniform, complete with a sheriff's badge. Sheriff Guthrie didn't pick up on the first call, but Earl hung up and tried again. Sometimes Sheriff Guthrie took a minute to get awake in the morning. "Sheriff Guthrie," he breathed out, and Earl could almost hear the hangover in his voice. "Sheriff, thank God! You got to get down to the cemetery." There was a pause, the sound of something being shifted, and then his thoughts seemed to come together. "What's the trouble?" "It's Sheriff Masterson's grave. Something's happened to it." There was a sound like a breaking window in the background, and he started to think the sheriff might not be okay. When he came back, Earl had no illusions that things were very un-okay at the Guthrie house. "What happened?" Guthrie asked breathlessly. Earl gulped. It's empty." He was quiet again, the sound of shifting glass grating on his nerves, before he got it together. "Empty?" Guthrie asked. "What's empty?" The grave. Someone dug it up last night." Sheriff Guthrie was breathing pretty hard on the other side of the phone, finally saying he would be right there. "Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Earl started to tell him that he wouldn't let anybody near the site, but Guthrie hung up on him, and Earl was left to move his truck and wait for the cops to arrive. It didn't take long, and about 7 minutes later, a police cruiser came in with the lights and sirens blaring. Sheriff Guthrie squealed to a stop beside the open grave, coming out with a phone pressed to his ear as he held a finger up to Earl when he started walking over. Yes. Yeah, that's right. I don't give a shit what he's sleeping off. I need forensics over here immediately. Someone has desecrated the memorial of Sheriff Masterson, and I want to know who. Yeah, well, wake him up and tell him if he doesn't get his ass here ASAP, I'll replace him with someone who will. Sheriff Guthrie hung up, turning to Earl and looking like he may have gotten even less sleep than the gravedigger did. All right, Earl, tell me what happened. Earl went through all of it, telling the sheriff everything he had seen since he'd arrived. He'd opened the gate, drove towards the office, noted the grave, inspected the hole, and called the sheriff. As he finished telling it, another cop pulled up and Deputy Parks hopped out, followed by Deputy Woods. Woods had coffee in his hand, Parks toting one of those Monster energy drinks, and the two looked less than bushy-tailed this morning. Jesus Christ, Parks said, blowing out a low whistle. Whew. I've seen some hell in my day, but this is one for the books. You got cameras, Earl? Guthrie asked, looking hopeful. Sure, Earl said, sounding scandalized. Doesn't everyone? Plus it saves me money on my insurance if I have 24-hour surveillance. Parks, Woods, you two stay here and wait for forensics. Don't touch anything. I want them to have a clean field once they get here. Earl, show me these cameras. You think they caught something? Earl said, leading the way as he headed towards his office. I hope so, Guthrie said. Otherwise, we might be in for some trouble. Guthrie sighed as he rewound the tape for about the 1,000th time. This was crazy. There had to be something else. Earl had about 8 cameras, all of them set up at key points, and none of them had caught anything incriminating. At 4:46 a.m., the grave had suddenly been covered in static, and when the static cleared, at 4:48 a.m., the damage was done. The grave had seemingly exploded outward. The headstone was broken. The uniform could be seen, though barely, at the bottom of the hole. Whatever had happened here had happened so quickly that it could hardly be seen at all. I just don't understand, Earl said, as Guthrie rolled the tape back again and again. Who would do such a thing like this to Sheriff Masterson's grave? Guthrie didn't say anything. He could think of one person, or someone who had been a person, who would do this kind of thing in the face of such a grand gesture. The town had decided to bury his memory, since they couldn't bury his body, so he would show them the folly of their ways. Masterson would also send a message to the new sheriff, too. Watch your back, or end up in a hole beside his, the message seemed to say. You're sure the gate was locked when you got here? Every night, Sheriff, Earl assured him. We can't have people just coming in unsupervised, messing up headstones and such. Guthrie thought about it. It was too coincidental to be anything but the old ghost that had been haunting him all night. Why Sheriff Masterson had decided to come back now, he didn't know, but it couldn't be a coincidence. They had put off the municipal election last year in case Masterson somehow turned up. But come January, there would be no putting it off. Guthrie would campaign, and he suspected that he might be able to run unopposed. The other deputies were mostly interested in paying their bills and writing tickets, and had no interest in being the power behind the throne. His phone rang then, and Guthrie gritted his teeth as he looked at the number. He supposed it was about time this stuffed shirt got up. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Don't good morning me, Guthrie, Mayor Cognito yelled. What in the hell is so good about waking up to find the grave of our last sheriff desecrated? Well, no one's kids seem to have been kidnapped, run over, or cut their mouths on razor blade apples, so that's always laugh it up, temporary Sheriff Guthrie. This looks real bad for you, you know that? Sheriff Masterson was a beloved town figure who had been the Sheriff of Kashmir for nearly 3 decades. If you don't find who did this, do you really think the people are going to vote for you in January? Guthrie bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood. He couldn't wait to shrug this temporary moniker. He hated being reminded that he wasn't official. Hated it more than anything. He had done good work in the year following Masterson's death, but no one would admit it. They all wanted to live in the past. Well, he was the future. I'm already on it, Mayor. The town will have some answers soon. Rest assured. Yeah? Well, I have a press conference scheduled by noon. Bring your evidence there, and it better be good, or I will find someone else to temporarily do your job. He hung up then, and Guthrie slid the little flip phone the department made him carry back into his pocket before he could throw it across the room. He took out his radio and called for Parks, waiting impatiently as the deputy took his time to answer. Parks and Woods were good officers. So were Ringo and Marquez, but they were the embodiment of podunk, good old boy police officers. When Woods told him that he'd never been farther from Kashmir than Tiger, Guthrie believed him. He couldn't imagine any of them getting further than Gatlinburg or Branson, and only on vacation. These were the kind of guys who took their kids to Dollywood or PCB in the summer and pinched their pennies so they could do it again next year. His dad would have called them shirt-tail poor, but that seemed like a stretch most days. Parks here. Go ahead, Guthrie. Guthrie was getting about tired of the casual disrespect, but he let it slide. Parks was honestly too simple to be complicated most days. Has forensics arrived, Deputy Parks? Yeah, they said they found some, but Guthrie cut him off with the channel scrapper. The last thing he wanted was someone from Mountain Radio or, God forbid, Channel 8 Kashmir with a radio booster to pick up on it. The channel scrubber was a neat little feature on the sheriff's radio that would allow him to break over an existing line and stop it from transmitting, which was good because these boys sometimes forgot that they weren't supposed to put sensitive information out over the radio. Negative, Deputy Parks. Do not transmit sensitive information over the band. Repeat, do not transmit sensitive information over the band. I will be en route momentarily. Parks stammered some kind of half-assed apology, but Guthrie was already turning to take the CD out of Earl's camera system. I don't need to tell you not to talk about anything you may or may not think you saw here today, right? He asked Earl, his face a mask of professionalism. Earl nodded slowly. Of course, Sheriff. I wouldn't dream of it. Good, he said, walking out of a little office in the back of the shed and heading towards the gravesite. At least someone knew how to hang on to their lip. Guthrie, Parks squawked, heading towards him as he came up to the grave. I didn't mean to... It's Sheriff Guthrie, Deputy Parks, Guthrie said, injecting as much patience as he could. When it's just us boys in the office, then we can use last names. But in the field, titles matter. Also, remember, we're not the only ones on the radio. If it's something you intend to put in a report, don't say it on the radio. Clear? Gotcha, Sheriff, he amended. Anyway, the forensics boys are saying they hadn't found much. Couple of footprints, but no fingerprints. Whoever did this must have worn gloves. The uniform, though, definitely used to be Masterson's. The badge, too. They found hair and prints on both. Guthrie could have told him that. They both looked like the ones from the memorial case in the station. And if he went there, Guthrie figured he would find them missing. That meant that someone had broken into the station, too. Lovely. Today's headache would never end, it seemed. Do they have any idea who did this? Guthrie asked, his cool rapidly deteriorating. Nothing, Sheriff. They did find something, he said, seeming to waffle. What? Guthrie asked. What did they find? A piece of skin, Parks said, turning a little green as he did. Skin? What do you mean? The sheriff repeated. Like, the tip of a finger on the edge of the headstone. Well, then that should give them blood, DNA, something they can... It ain't regular skin. Park said, clearly wanting to change the subject. They said it's like skin from a corpse. It's old and kind of dried up. They don't know what to make of it. One of them thought it might be from Masterson's body before I reminded him that there was nobody in that grave. Guthrie nodded, beginning to grasp the situation. I have to go to a press conference at noon. You and Woods stay here with the forensic boys until they're done. Call me with an update. On the phone, he said, holding up the silver flip phone for emphasis. Got it, Sheriff, Park said, and Guthrie headed back to the cruiser. He needed to write something up before noon. He had to face the public. At around 4 a.m., the Whispering Pines Cemetery was broken into by an unknown person or persons. They interrupted the camera feed somehow and desecrated the memorial of the town's beloved citizen, Nicholas Masterson. At this time, forensics has been unable to find any tracery evidence to link this crime to any particular individual. Boot prints were discovered at the scene, but no fingerprints have been discovered at this time. The Kashmir Police Department is asking anyone who has information on the incident to come forward. We want to bring this person or persons to justice. The crowd was small, their applause scattered, but Guthrie had eyes only for the rotting corpse standing beneath the trees at the edge of the park. It grinned at him, clapping as the speech came to an end before it disappeared suddenly in the wake of a news van. Guthrie wasn't surprised. Ex-Sheriff Masterson was just something he was going to have to deal with now, it appeared, as if he didn't have enough on his plate. This is bad, Sheriff Guthrie, Mayor Cognito told him as he walked away from the podium. Voters will remember this in a few months if you don't, Mr. Mayor, Guthrie said, stopping the little man in his tracks as he turned to smile at him. I appreciate your concern, but the department is hard at work on this one. We'll let you know if we find anything and keep you posted as events unfold. Mayor Cognito cleared his throat, nodding curtly. Good. See that you do. Guthrie walked off then, making his way back to the station. It appeared that the treats were gone, but the tricks were going to be far from seasonal this year.
And just like that, our spooky tales are at an end once again. I do hope you'll come back tomorrow for more cozy horror, and I do hope you've enjoyed our holiday programming. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.